Welcome to a new episode of the podcast, everyone. Today's topic is Non-Duality 101. What is non-duality? On the last episode, we talked about Kyle's life after awakening and all the things he was doing, but it wasn't a lot of spiritual research, reading all the non-duality books and the history of non-duality. Kyle, would you say you're interested in non-duality before awakening and after awakening?
I had never heard of the word non-duality until
Hmm.
after I'd had that shift happen. Like I said, the main teachers that I resonated with before were Don Miguel Ruiz and Eckhart Tolle, and I don't think
Hmm.
either mentioned that word at all, but they were talking about the same thing.
Hmm.
Yeah, I came across that word when I started researching what to do and how to go about sharing this mystery with people, and it,
Hmm.
it made a lot of sense. That word helped open me up to a whole other world that existed, a spiritual world with lots of different teachers and traditions, and uh,
Hmm.
I didn't really dive into it very much. I've never had enough of an interest to learn a lot of the details of people's traditions or anything.
Hmm.
But overall,
Did it resonate with you, the idea of non-duality? Did you get it immediately, or
uh, sorry, could you rephrase that one?
like when you first maybe read it in a book or heard someone talk about it, did it make sense to you?
Yeah, yeah. Well, shortly after that shift happened, actually the same day at nighttime when I got home from my job, there was a lot of processing happening, just kind of the mind recalibrating and reorganizing itself. And
Mm.
I remember standing in the kitchen at my parents' house, and then my dad entered the room, and I looked at him for the first time, and I looked at him for the first time without seeing my dad. And it wasn't like he was replaced by some other identity. It was just that the dadness was gone. And there was just this really strong felt sense of um, unity, I guess, which is non-duality. And
Hmm.
I remembered the words came through my head. I had come across it many times through some spiritual books I had read, which was, we're all one. So that thought came across after I had had that feeling, that experience with my dad. And I was like, oh, now I know what that means. And that was, I guess, a very distinct entrance into the concept of non-duality, I guess, of using that concept in the work I was going to start doing.
Is non-duality something that's always discovered, or is it like a creation of people to describe the?
I would say non-duality is just a word that describes ultimate truth. That's all.
Hmm.
That's all it is. So
Uh,
technically, everybody is non-dual.
hmm.
Everything is non-dual. It just means nothing is separate from anything. That's the ultimate truth. So yeah, there's like a subsection of you know of the internet, that of the world, a small community that hovers around the non-dual title, but it doesn't mean that they're more non-dual than you know Kim Jong-un, or
Yeah.
I don't know why I thought of him.
I think one of our past conversations, I think we were having a conversation, and I think you said this is kind of like the end game, the ultimate.
Non-duality, when the word non-duality actually starts entering your sphere, yeah, it's kind of like if we were to use the Matrix movies like an example. It's kind of like starting to see the code.
Mm.
How everything's kind of written. Once that idea or concept starts entering you know your mind, It usually signifies, you're nearing the end of your journey as a illusory separate piece of consciousness
Mm.
or a
So,
soul. Call it a soul. It could be taboo. I know a lot of non-dual people don't like the word soul, but I'm going to use it just to piss people off.
well, you have to use concepts. So I guess that's why the negative way of phrasing it, not two instead of all one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Not two feels a bit safer than, the warmer personal feeling that comes with being all one or unity. But it's really the
yeah.
same thing.
So over the years, you've entered the non-dual community and seen it. What's your perspective on it as of now, having been a teacher for many years?
It's been a while since I've kind of really done a lot of research into the non-dual world. There was a period about a year and a half ago where I kind of experimented with interviewing some other non-dual teachers, and after maybe like 8 or 10 of them, there was this feeling of done with that. You know, I don't know what it is. There is something that comes across in a lot of the non-dual community that feels very anti-life, or
Oh,
also just a lot of denial and
mm,
hiding from trauma, and yeah, it's just there seems to be still a lot of self-deception going on there. People love to hear themselves think about these non-dual concepts and share them with other people.
mm,
It feels like it acts almost like a safe haven sometimes to say, to just be told these beautiful words like, you're not your mind, you know, there's nothing you have to do, or that big delusional one, which is you're already enlightened. It feels like a safe place to hide out, because if that's true, if those concepts point to something that's true, then that means I don't have to, there's no part of my conditioning or anything that, matters anymore. And on one level, I'll say, yeah, that's true. That's none of it really ultimately matters. But in terms of you evolving through consciousness, it actually does. Your conditioning does need to be looked at.
mm,
And, you know, if you want to go deeper into this experience of life, then your programming can't just be glossed over. That's why I've created programs and stuff that, take a nosedive into
mm.
the
Yeah.
story.
I think there's so much content, including this podcast, that it might be overwhelming for a lot of people entering into the subject.
Yeah. 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 Like, in what way exactly?
Like this is like a small podcast in the corner of the internet, but there might be another person with a large following and in a large room talking about an ancient scripture from 2,000 years ago. It seems more, you can be like swept up in all the theater of it.
Yeah. 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 Because, if you're really serious about non-duality, getting to the heart of things, finding out just what's ultimately real, it is very destructive of all of the world's traditions, sacred texts. It
Mm,
pretty much takes a match to all of that, and it becomes life becomes very straightforward and simple and ordinary, which, nobody who goes to a temple to worship a golden statue wants ordinary. They want
yeah.
to feel like there's something special going on. And paradoxically, what I talk about is incredibly special and profound. but it's not in a mind understanding kind of way.
Would you call yourself a teacher of non-duality, or is that word not the best word for what you do?
They're all pretty terrible. On Amazon, my biography says I'm a teacher of enlightenment, which is ridiculous too. But I would say that I'm primarily a mirror with not a lot of dirt on it for people who are willing to really look and see, what's going on.
Since you brought up the word enlightenment, what is the relationship with non-duality?
Well, enlightenment is the realization of not,
And what does no self play into all this?
well, no self has to do with all of it. Non-duality means there's not two, which means there's not ultimately a self because you need something apart from that self for that self to be. That comes enlightenment brings that realization of no self, which is non-duality.
Now, the last question: how does free will play into all this?
Yeah. So in my experience, the way this whole game is set up is so that you don't really go deeper unless you play the role of somebody that has choice. And you can play the role of somebody who doesn't have choice, but it's not really going to do anything for you, So it's kind of set up like if you want to get to the bottom of things, then, you got to do some digging. You can sit on your laurels and think that's it. But I think if you're honest, you're still stuck. And yet at the same time, if the non-dual truth is that nothing needs to arrive, there's nothing that's incomplete, then that effort is in one way futile, but it's also not at the same time because of how this is all set up. So
I think that's the part where people get confused. Effort? Do I do something or not do something?
it's basically do something until you've fully, cleanly, 100% beyond a shadow of a doubt realized that you can't do anything else. That you're truly done, that you've turned over every stone, And I know there's a lot of people that probably be like, oh, I have turned over every stone, you know, but the
Wow.
fact that there's negativity shows that you haven't.
Uh, so back from episode one, in your story, you were turning over every stone in your late teens through the practice, and
Yeah, there was just this yearning to find out what is really at the heart of reality because the reality I was programmed with was incredibly painful and judgmental and just, wrought with incompleteness. And so there's this deep yearning to, find out what is really the truth of things. Do I really, need to keep struggling and suffering?
earlier you said like some of the non-dual community might be a little anti-life. Is a non-duality ultimately a very positive
Yeah, it's
thing?
entirely true. Non-duality is entirely positive. What better news is there than that you're one with
Mhm.
all that exists? How's that bad news?
Maybe the negativity is coming from like the futility of no self and what's the point of all this?
Yeah, it's because for the mind anyway, it can only really truly stick with one side over the other. It can't really hold two truths at the same time. But truth is a unified duality, which is
Yeah.
which sounds contradictory, but a lot of the non-dual folks tend to hang out in the void side of things,
Yeah.
right? And ignore the existential side of things to denounce it all And when you do that, this life becomes dry and dull, and you just become kind of cranky and a bit of an asshole, you know, sometimes. It can happen.
Mm. In one of our past episodes, we talked about the myth of creation, and today you brought up Kim Jong-un in the beginning. I think like when someone sees like the situation in North Korea, they're like, "Oh, what's the point of all this? Where's the truth of life?"
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of those things where you have to allow your humility to answer all of those questions in situations like that. It's kind of because if you don't, it's really like you're kind of an ant, struggling with why your ant hill kind of caved in a little bit. And of course, you're an
Mm,
ant, so you can't really zoom out and see this whole other reality at play that is
mm.
affecting that little ant, you know, that ant hill, and it's all interconnected, and nothing is happening out of sorts. There's nothing that not should not be happening, no matter how heinous it is, which is from our very limited human perspective, very hard to, well, kind of impossible to understand. But
Mm.
that doesn't mean it's not true. It doesn't mean that something's off with the universe.
You said something should not be happening. So before, in your teenage years, did you feel that way? Like this shouldn't be happening this way, versus after awakening?
Yeah, like, yeah, my whole, all the way up until I was 20, it was just nonstop, this should not be happening. But only because, I had a version of reality that should have been happening. I was so deeply attached to that version of reality that should be happening that wasn't, that was causing all the suffering and struggle. And I was unwilling to question that version of reality that should be happening.
The version of reality that should be that is that all the thoughts in your head versus after?
Basically, anything that said there's a right way for life to unfold and there's a wrong way for it to unfold, right? That's where the suffering was. So the suffering didn't end until it got to a point where what wasn't supposed to be happening, supposedly, um, was finally allowed to happen. And of course, when that happened, it canceled each other out. It canceled both versions of reality out. So it wasn't just that the worst started to become the only thing. It imploded because by accepting that, I gave up on the version that was supposed to be happening.
On the last episode, you said everything was so quiet. What was everything? Where did all the noise come from before? Uh,
Yeah, a part of the egoic story is pretty much a constant. There's like a constant you could say. I bet at some point some consciousness scientists will discover something like this, but it's like there's a constant a background noise, a vibratory disturbance, um, that doesn't ever let up, doesn't stop. So long as you believe that you are somebody on a path, going to get somewhere, on a journey, on a mission,
mm.
gonna finally attain whatever it is you're trying to attain. It's like all of that is connected to this constant that is always, always playing. And when that finally gets interrupted, it's like, wow, the world wasn't noisy at all.
Is it still very quiet for you in your daily life?
Yeah. Yeah. I joke with my kids sometimes and I just say, if I can't remember what the reason was the other day. I think my daughter felt insecure about something. And I can't remember what it was in the car. And she's like, what are you thinking about? I was like, I'm not thinking about anything. I was like, serious. If you were to look inside my head right now, it'd just be a
Mm,
couple of birds just chirping or
mm.
some crickets.
So I guess this kind of brings up the meditation part of spirituality and non-duality, like what role consistent meditation and meditation practice
Yeah.
plays.
Yeah. Meditation is meant to just seduce you into going deeper into the truth. I was already seduced fully when I was younger. So I didn't need to really explore meditation all that much. I dabbled in it a little bit, but I already just had this burning desire to get to the bottom of things. But meditation is really the purpose of it is to intensify your curiosity to get to the bottom of things. But if you
Mm.
think about meditation also sounds incredibly dull, and it's like nobody wants to have to meditate. Like what the hell, you know,
Yeah.
to have to do something in order to be at peace. Is that the best that reality can muster? Is that the best human experience that can be had? Is that you have to be, this little monk all the time? That's
Mm.
pretty lame. So
Have you gone into like the meditation practices and like, because they do talk about like deeper states of consciousness that they achieve from very long practice.
yeah, good for them. All I hear is, look how special I am. Look what I've seen. Love me, accept me. Look how,
Mm.
you know, look what I've done. Look what I've seen. Who gives a shit? You know?
Have you experienced those like non-ordinary states that people talk about, whether through meditation or psychedelics?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But that's not awakening. That's just something else, or
It's it's for somebody to experience. So that's great and all, you know. But honestly, there's really no difference than listening to someone talk about their lovely altered state of consciousness. Someone talk about how delicious that chocolate bar is over there.
um,
Who cares? It's great. I mean, it gives you insight into things, but you still come back, wanting a trophy or wanting a badge, or if it helps you to see into a deeper reality, great, and know more about how things operate so that you can just ease off the gas and let go of the steering wheel, you know, great.
yeah. You mentioned letting go of the steering wheel. That's something Jed McKenna talks about in his book. He says you have to pry someone's hand off the steering wheel. Could you go a little deeper into that? What do you mean by that?
Yeah. Well, the moment that you come into the world and you finally, unequivocally decide that you are somebody, you're a somebody separate from life. That's the moment that you completely shift into believing that you're in control of what's happening and what's going to happen, and on one hand, it seems like great, finally I got the keys to the kingdom here. I can carve out my own path and make it this wonderful thing. But, the other side of that is no, you can't. And, would you want to anyway? Where does that need come from? This need to control things and carve out your own path. It comes from a place of unworthiness, self-rejection.
Mm.
It's not just you're not naturally ambitious when you come into
Oh,
that's kind of what I'm talking about is ambition, egoic ambition. Every
mm.
ego is ambitious.
Isn't that kind of the whole world? Isn't that the whole world?
Right. Everybody's gonna make
Mm.
it at some point.
Uh,
Um,
like you said about ambition, but like you have children who are growing up in the world. Do you see like the influence of the
yeah.
culture?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's a challenging part of being a parent is seeing all of
Mm.
these unhealthy things that they're picking up, things that at some point is going to cause them a lot of pain, probably, and they are forced to, you know, to really look at it and question whether or not it's good for them. Right now, if they're kind of in the stage where they're not questioning it, it
Mm.
has to be good for them because that's just the way things are. It's what everybody else does. So so all I can do, all I can be for them is just,
Hmm.
casually remind them sometimes that it's all. I use the word bullshit a lot in my house. You know,
Uh,
but this is so cool. This guy's it's all bullshit. You know?
it's like George Carlin. Carlin. It's all bullshit.
Yeah. Or horse shit or dog shit.
Yeah.
One of
Mm.
those three.
I think you've also noticed that essentially nobody's interested in even spirituality or non-duality. Do you have any insight into like why all the programming is in the opposite direction?
Well, everybody's interested in getting to a point where they're just permanently okay with things with themselves.
Hmm.
Everybody.
Hmm.
And for some people, that's getting that big job or getting that big car or getting that big relationship, and others, it's getting that big uh, certificate of enlightenment, getting that praise from a bunch of followers. But everybody's trying to get something. Doesn't really matter what you call it. So everybody's on the spiritual path, whether they call it a spiritual path or not. You know, and like we were saying, once that word non-duality enters your sphere, or you start realizing that this is a spiritual thing that you're involved in here, then that's good news. It means that that seed of striving and ambition is starting to dry up
Hmm.
because you're starting to see the background code.
Yeah. So I think people might be having like a longer term perspective on it in terms of like death and reincarnation. Does that play a role in the teaching?
You mean,
Like, are you gonna have to do this all over again?
right? Well, uh, that's a good way to put it. There is no such thing as permanent sleep, right? And believing that you're somebody, that you're separate from life, is what it means to be asleep. And just because the body dies doesn't mean you stop sleeping. Your dream just becomes more malleable.
Mm.
And then maybe, you know, you do some more exploring. Maybe you don't have a body for a while. But if there's still this hardened, attachment to being this separate entity, then that asleepness is continuing. And what's it going to take, to wake you up out of that? Because it can't go on forever. And if you don't have a body, you know, there's less friction happening, there's less difficulty happening, less motivation to wake up. It's more motivation to just dream a bit more of a pleasant dream. But at some point, there's this yearning to go deeper that, okay, you know, enough's enough here, you know. So you get pulled into wanting more difficulty, more challenging situations again for yourself, just so that you have a better opportunity to wake up, to snap out of it.
Mm.
So as far as I can tell, my intuition and my memories and things like that, this, you know, reality is the most challenging situation, you know, you could ever put yourself in. That
Really? It doesn't get more challenging than this one?
Well, if you do a quick assessment, you're you're supposedly this little character. You have a name, you have an
Mm.
expiration date stamped on your forehead. You got illnesses left, right, and center that are, consuming you or going to probably. Um, there's injustices everywhere. There's there's cravings, there's desires that just can't let you rest. There's just the reality of having this thing that you got to lug around
Hmm.
that needs so much maintenance. You got to feed it, you got to shit it, you got to do all these things, and it's a lot of work, and it intensifies the experience of exhaustion, spiritual exhaustion, this consciousness to be like, enough is enough. So, because you could theoretically not ever, theoretically, you could never come back into a body again if once you drop this meat suit, However, eventually, it's 100% guaranteed that you will reach a point of dryness in the search. There won't be this burning curiosity, this lust for life anymore. It just keeps pulling you towards more and more experiences. Eventually, you know, you've been around the block 5,000, and you're going to reach a point where you're more than willing to put yourself in whatever situation you need to put yourself in to just be done with it all. Not because
Uh,
life itself is this big problem that needs to be solved. It's that it's in your nature to be drawn more and more to a state of utter freedom from limitation. Being somebody, being this individual entity is limiting.
I believe that's like the confusing part of non-duality when we talk about all one, but these separate souls and entities and the separate human experience.
Yeah. Yeah. That side doesn't get talked about a lot. I almost get the vibe it's not talked about because there's this fear that they'll get an F on their paper from their peers
Yeah.
if they talk about that. Yeah.
So I'd say the last question would be like the role of practice or a method. We talked a little bit about meditation, and you wrote a book called The Method. What's the role of practice for being finished?
Well, when you're ready, when you're at the point where you're almost ready to be finished, you don't really need a rule book anymore or even a practice. I wrote the method. I called it a method, but it's really just a guide to show you that there's some key stages that you enter into just before you're fully done. And they're all pretty much the same. When you have that burning yearning to be done with it all, it does kind of follow a progression, a universal progression, which is you set the whole world aside and you look inside and you ask yourself, what do I really know for sure? What can I
Hmm.
actually prove in my own experience that's real? So that was the first step, right?
I think we can end this episode of the podcast by going over quickly the universal steps, the method.
Yeah. So the steps of the method is prove what's real without thinking. What do you actually know that hasn't been told to you, that's never been told to you? What do you know for sure when you're not thinking?
When you ask that, it just go blank.
Right. Right. But there's more to that blankness
Hmm.
than just a word called blank. So you take that blank, you take that blankness, and then the next step I said was what's real comes first. If what you really know, the one thing you really know is just blank, then that's the full truth for you. And that blank should come first. That acknowledgement that that's actually all you know is blank should come first in everything you do in life. It has to be the most important thing because it's actually the only thing you really know for sure in your own experience,
Hmm.
right? So that should become the priority. And of course, if you make it your priority, that blank is not going to just stay this dull concept of blank. and you're going to start to see the nuance of it, what it's really all about. And that blank means you're not who you say you are, who you think you are. Other people are not who you say they are, who you think they are. What's happening in the world is not actually what's happening, because that's not your direct experience. That's not your firsthand primary knowledge. So then what is happening? If you prioritize what you know to be true, then what's actually happening? And that's the third step. Is It's been a while since I've recited these. Confront the dream. You naturally are drawn into confronting the dream life, because you're putting what you know, the one thing you know for sure first. You're making it your priority, and you're walking through this life now. You know, none of that has a storyline anymore, because that's not what you know for sure. So what is it now? So you're confronting it as it actually is, and all of the structures that have been put in place to keep it in place start to fall apart and break down naturally, without you trying to meddle with it. You just, by seeing what it is, it'll start to break down on its own. So relationships will dissolve. Depending on how intense you're going into this process, sometimes they'll dissolve pretty quickly. Jobs will stop, will end.
Mm.
You'll switch jobs, maybe, who knows? Family relationships will become more interesting.
When applying the method, the physical sensory moment comes to the foreground, and like you can objectively say you can't see with your eyes the future.
Mm-hmm.
That's usually what happens for me. The physicality comes to the forefront, the noise
Exactly.
of the
Yeah. The truth, you're basically stuck with just the facts, which is your immediate experience right now. What are you actually experiencing? Well, here I am sitting in this chair. There's some walls, you know, computer. But yeah, you can't see beyond that. Is that what you're talking about? You can't see
yeah.
10 minutes from now, you mean? So from there, confront the dream naturally shifts into allowing yourself to end, which is inevitable when you see that all of that was, all of your world was built on the assumption that you thought you knew who you were, and that it was this character. And once you see that, by sticking with the truth, what you actually know, which is blank, like you said, that character falls apart.
Hmm.
And it's not necessarily a negative thing. Sometimes it can seem like it is. It's just the inevitable outcome of allowing the truth to be seen. And then, I said the last step was letting go of freedom. And so when people read that step, they're like, right? Why would I go through this whole process only to, give up?
Hmm. Yeah.
But that's the whole point. This whole, like I was saying, that hum that's been there the whole time is the one that's been seeking freedom, trying to find it, trying to get to it. And when you finally see that the character is 100% fabricated, and
Yeah.
it only existed because it needed to find freedom. Well, when you give that up, you let go of freedom. You let go of the need to find freedom. And paradoxically, you realize freedom.
Okay, everyone. That was Non-Duality 101. We'll see you on the next episode.